Well, good morning, church. It is my privilege to welcome this morning Reverend Don Lewis. Don, come on up, and we're gonna do something a little different today, and some of that was going to include some technical stuff. So first off, Steve, I'm going to ask: Is this going to be okay if we sit down right where we're at? Okay, then we can do that. Go ahead and discussions about race are always difficult, and especially now in our nation. And it's very easy just to spout slogans or some kind of simplistic or unrealistic demands or solutions, and just think that, well, if we just close our eyes, it'll all go away or something like that. But it's important to have honest discussions. And when everything exploded after the death of George Floyd, I went to talk to Dawn because I needed some perspective. And I'm very grateful for Dawn's help to me about thinking through questions of racial injustice and proper ways to respond and things like that. And to see things through his eyes that I wouldn't have seen otherwise, and things that I couldn't understand or maybe might not be able to understand as well, because I just haven't had those same experiences. So what we're doing today is we're starting a conversation. And we're going to have a conversation here. We may stumble through it. That's part of the process. And we're going to continue this next week. And the honest truth is that 2 weeks is a ridiculously inadequate amount of time, even just to start defining what the issues are. But we have to start somewhere. And that's where we're going to start. And it's an important first step. One of the things I've learned, and I discovered this when I was in seminary, and we had a number of black students who were as part of our seminary class. And going to chapel with them and just talking with them, I began to realize for the first time in my life something about me, and that was that I never thought of myself as a white man. I didn't. And I don't think I'm unusual in that. If you were to ask me who you are, I would have gone through a whole lot of things, and at some point I might have said, oh, I guess I'm white. But it never dawned on me to even think like that. And I began to realize that's a very different experience or way of thinking for a black man. And what I realized was that my colleagues in seminary who were African American, one of the very first things that they identified as, they said, who are you? They said, well, I'm a black man, or a black woman. And I thought, well, that's just really odd, because I don't think of myself as a black person. And that's why a different approach to thinking about who they were told me something that I needed to know. And so I went to Dawn. Dawn, I'm going to ask you to start by sharing when I told you that for the first time. We had on your back porch there, and you had a response to me about your conversations with other blacks. And start us off with that.
On Friday, I visited a friend of mine who's a retired brigadier general who happens to be African American. And my wife and I would spend time with him and his wife over the past few years, and he was a member of the church in Shawnee where I was pastoring. And I happened to visit him this past Friday. His wife had passed away. I wanted to express my condolences and see how he was doing. And I mentioned to him the fact that I actually tell people about him in this regard. I said, I fraternize with a variety of people, various socioeconomic backgrounds and what have you. And I said to him, what I tell people is this: whenever I'm with an African American, within 30 minutes we end up talking about race. In fact, it usually is less time than that, without exception. And I said, even when I'm with a retired brigadier general who was at the top of his field and man of great accomplishment and achievement, we always end up talking about race. And I went on to explain that based on my experience, I said, white people don't talk about race.
Right.
And they don't see themselves as a particular ethnic group as such where it warrants talking or discussing. Everyone knows what they are ethnically, of course. And if you're Italian, you know you're Italian. If you're Portuguese, if you're whatever the case would be. But minorities talk about race a lot. And I began to think that through. I began to ask myself the question, why do people of color talk about race so much? I'm going to attempt to answer that. And this is just me. I haven't read this, I haven't researched this, but this is just my own personal experience. I grew up in a very multicultural environment in Oakland, California. I've shared with Pastor Barry that when I was an elementary age kid, I would go to my friends' homes, and it was very common for my friends' parents to not speak English. Now, they would speak Cantonese, they would speak Spanish, they would speak Tagalog, which is Filipinos speak. They would speak Italian, Portuguese. I'm not exaggerating. I just had an array of friends. I thought that was a typical American experience. It never dawned on me that my experience was unique, but all my friends were so ethnic and distinctive, and their parents would come over on the boat or something like that. I mean, I had so many friends whose parents didn't speak. It was as normal as if they had spoken English. I'm not exaggerating. And I'd walk in the door, and he would talk to his mom. His mom would say, "Welcome, come, can you stay for dinner?" in her language, and he would translate for me. That was normal. One of my closest friends was Chinese, and it was a Chinese girl, and her mom fed me like I was starving to death. Yeah. And I discovered that was part of the culture, that you go to a Chinese person's home, you have to eat. And I remember one day I was in college, and I was sitting in my Volkswagen, and I went over to the house to spend time with the family, and she had 3 brothers, and I interacted with the brothers a lot. And I said to myself, I'm sitting in my car, and I looked in the mirror, and I said, "You will not eat." I'm talking to myself. You will not. I don't care what she says, you will not eat. And about 2 hours later, I was in that same Volkswagen after spending time with the family with a drumstick in my hand. And I was looking at it, and I said, "You have failed. You have failed." And not only had I eaten, but I had brought food with me, the drumstick. That was a part of that culture. I went to Chinese weddings, and boy, if you get invited to a Chinese wedding, go. I tell you what, you'll eat great. Okay. Don't forget that. No. My Japanese roommate, he was explaining to me how he was not really Japanese. What do you mean you're not Japanese? His name was Elmer Tamayuki Inufuku. And he says, "I'm not Japanese." I said, "What are you then?" "I'm Okinawan." "Okinawan? What do you mean? You're Japanese." "I'm not really Japanese. There's a distinction between Okinawans and Japanese." I had never heard that before. And he explained it to me and the history of it. And I was learning about culture. He's a pastor in Tokyo now. I've been there for decades, but a great, great friend of mine. And like I said, we lived together for years in school. Filipinos. You don't have a lot of Filipinos out here. But in California, they're all over the place. And I remember having a Filipino meal in his home, and his mom, she graciously served me. And that was just my experience. Now, having said that, what also was my experience was this. I accepted Christ as my Savior at the age of 16. And because of my background with all those particular cultures and ethnic groups, and because of my conversion at 16 and having grown up in a church similar to this, I had been taught that the distinctive was not your race. The distinctive was, were you born again or not? That was the distinctive in life. That was the most significant distinctive, and I was taught that. A little bit of background there. The pastor of the church where I spent much of my growing up years was white. His name was Baldwin H. Sherman. And he would visit his congregants unannounced. And he would come over to our house, knock on the door, and there we were. He always came around dinner time, by the way, not exaggerating. Coincidental. and my parents being Southerners, even though we were in California, they were raised in the South, they would always say, "Would you stay for dinner, Pastor Sherman?" And he always said yes. And they'd find a plate and food for the guy, and he'd sit down with us, and he would eat and talk to all of us kids and talk to my parents. And that happened a number of times. I remember one time at the dinner table, something was mentioned about the fact that my dad's car had broken down. And it was like a movie, because we finished dinner, and the next scene was that there was Reverend Sherman under my dad's car with my dad working on the car. My family believed that if there was a Christian, it was Reverend Sherman and his wife. Grace Sherman, his wife, taught me the plan of salvation. And when Pastor Sherman, so at 14, I attended a class that she was teaching, and the plan of salvation was laid out very clearly. And then not a short time later, Pastor Sherman passed away, and Grace Sherman went to the mission field. And at 16, I gave my life to Christ. But I was able to do that because of what she had taught me at the age of 14. Years later, after high school, after college, into pastorate in California, eventually we moved to Arkansas where I was pastoring, and I was able to somehow contact Grace Sherman, who had retired from the mission field. She was living in San Jose, very elderly, and I was able to tell her by phone what her ministry had done for me and who she was. She remembered me, and she found it so gratifying to hear that God had used her to impact my life. I said, I'm a husband, I have 4 kids, I'm pastoring a church, and Sister Sherman, you are responsible for all that. Now, what does this have to do with anything? When I came to Christ, I truly thought we were one. I truly believed it. I truly thought that there is neither Jew nor Greek, bond nor free, but we're all one in Christ Jesus. And I ran into, it was like running into a glass door. I found there was a time when my friend was told to be careful of me, and a pastor told my friend this. The pastor went on to explain that I, Don Lewis, who was attempting to become a part of a congregation that was majority white, not because it was majority white, I loved the teaching that was going on, and I was willing to sacrifice comfort and being the only black person there because I loved the teaching. And the pastor told my friend that the only reason I was there was to exploit. And my friend was told to not be with me and not to be careful.
Hang on here. Don't pull any punches. Tell him what he said.
Well, what he actually said was that the only reason I was going to that church was to pick up on a white woman. A black man would do anything to get his hands on a white woman. That's the quote. I was so embarrassed, my friend, to tell me that had been said about me. I was so humiliated. I actually wanted to cry, and I couldn't. That's what they think? That's what they think? I remember I had gone to great lengths to decide to go to that church. It was a distance away. It was awkward to drive there because of the distance, and it was awkward just to be the only black person there, but I so loved the teaching. I remember another time where I forgot that I was black. I'm almost embarrassed to admit that I forgot I was black. I'm just hanging around all these different kids. But the parents of these kids were the ones who would say, watch that kid. He's not hanging around you for just any reason. Watch that kid. And my friends would come back and say, my mom, my dad, or in this case, the pastor had told me that you have a problem. And no, you can't come to this event. My best friend got married, and my best friend wanted me to be in the wedding, and the parents didn't want me in the wedding, and they were insisting, my best friend and the bride and groom were insisting, well, Don needs to be in the wedding, he's our friend. And so they got as far as, they made me the head usher, that's as far as they could get. And but I couldn't be a groomsman, obviously, and because the parents would just protested. I remember, so at the reception, I was coerced to get into the group to catch the garter and all the bachelors. And so the garter was thrown, and I out-jumped everybody and caught the garter. And as I pulled the garter, and I remember looking at my best friend's dad, and he was infuriated. He was shaking. Good Lord. And there again, it was just embarrassing that I caught the garter, but they hadn't wanted me in the wedding in the first place. That became my experience. I used to ask myself, what am I doing going to integrated churches? I actually would question myself because I would have individuals. I'm 72 years of age, so I'm a 60s kid, 1960s. And it was during the Civil Rights Movement, as you remember those days. And it's enjoyable talking to people that know what the Civil Rights Movement is, by the way. You have no idea. I talk to millennials, and they don't, what was that? So anyway, I remember, I cannot tell you how many individuals, all who were white, and pastors, all who were white, would say something along the lines of, what are those people doing down there? Or, what are your people doing down there? What do you mean? What do you mean? Everything was fine till that Martin Luther King came along. They weren't having any problems, and he's causing all this disruption. And what are they doing and why? And sometimes they would be angry. And have you ever been told you couldn't go to a restroom or a restaurant? What do you mean? Everything wasn't fine. And they insisted. What are they doing down there? I don't know if you...
And just to be clear, these were not Southerners.
No, this is California.
This was California.
This is California.
Progressive, that thought of themselves as we're
thinkers and
we're
progressives.
Progressives, but everything was fine down there because we didn't have to deal with it.
Yeah. I remember one Sunday morning, the pastor, who was white, got up and announced that Martin Luther King was a communist. And of course, that was one of the accusations. But the fact that would be said from the pulpit Sunday morning, prime time. So I struggled, and I didn't understand. I think I understand it now, but I struggled for years with attitudes. And I recognized that I needed to watch where I went and what I would say and who I would be with. It was very common for someone to walk up to me and say, my parents or my uncle doesn't like black people, but he thinks you're great. And they actually thought that was a compliment. Years later, my wife and I married. I had been pastoring for 2 years before we married. And we moved to Arkansas after us pastoring in California. And that's another story for 5 years. And then we moved to Washington, D.C., and a short time after moving to the Washington, D.C. area, we helped plant a church. And it was a fledgling congregation, and there were several ministers, and I needed to generate additional income to support my wife and kids. And so I studied insurance, and I was going to become an insurance agent. And I figured if I can sell non-tangibles, that is the gospel, certainly I ought to be able to sell insurance. And so I studied, I took the exam, passed the exam, and I was led to an individual who was an insurance broker. He had his own brokerage. When I said led to, I was giving his name and number. So I started calling him, and he was excited as the day is long. He would ask me questions to make sure I understood our product and what have you. And we had more than one conversation. And he was thrilled. He began to tell me the things that we were going to do and things we were going to accomplish and how we were going to do it. And he explained to me that I was going to fit as a great partner of his, and he would show me the ropes. And he was extremely enthusiastic. Well, I was new to the industry, and so I became excited and thrilled. And the day came in which I was to go into his office and meet him for the first time. I walk into his office, and don't forget, we've had several conversations on the phone. And don't forget, the level of enthusiasm was great, exciting. I was encouraged. Walked in this office, he looks at me, and he doesn't smile. And literally his first words were that, You didn't tell me you were black. I said, well, you didn't tell me you were white. So now that we are beyond that, what are we going to do? And he literally began to explain to me, it's not going to work. Wait a minute. What about all the ideas? What about the plans? What about we were going to take the market by storm? What about this? And all the things we had talked about? We had several conversations. What about? And he literally said to me, hey, it's just not going to work. Sorry.
You know, those kind of experiences, they hit me like a blow to the head.
And let me just say this, that insurance experience captured my experience as a teenager coming to Christ. It captured it. That was what my experience was like when I came to Christ, and I assumed that what I had been taught was what was to be my experience, that we're one. I've heard that, having been raised in church all my life. There's only basically two kinds of people according to the scriptures. According to the book of Revelations, there's only two kinds of people, those whose names are found in the book of life and those whose names are not found. Mm-hmm. I've been raised to believe that. My experience was the exact opposite of that. Yeah. And it was particularly disheartening. Now, in contrast to my experience, my wife sitting here, my wife grew up in South Central Louisiana, deep southern roots, and her family goes back to the 1800s in the particular area where she grew up. Her dad was a farmer and a carpenter. Her mom was a school teacher. And like I said, the family in that area goes back to the 1800s. Her great-grandfather founded the church in 1888, which is where she grew up, in the great-grandfather's church, which is where we were married, by the way. Elementary, segregated schools. Middle school, junior high, segregated schools. High school, segregated schools. College, traditionally black college. She never attended an integrated school until grad school. Never attended an integrated school until grad school, where all I've ever experienced was integrated schools. I didn't know people didn't go to integrated schools. You know, that's just all I knew. I referenced all the kinds of friends I had. And so it was interesting talking about my history versus her history. And she got me through pastoring, when I was pastoring in Arkansas, she got me through it. I didn't know my place. And so I'm standing there at the grocery store in line in Little Rock, Arkansas. Confederate flag might be on the wall. I'm not joking. Confederate flags are all over the place. And I just said, I wonder what they're trying to say to me. And I'm standing in line, and Mary might be there. And I did not know not to talk to her. This is the way I was raised. Oh, you like Roxaroni? And I'm looking at her grocery card, which she has, and I would start a conversation. I heard this every time virtually I would do that. I can't tell you how many times I heard the response. You're not from here, are you? Well, no, I'm not. Where are you from? California. Oh, I heard it over and over and over again. You're not from here, are you?
And it wasn't just an observation, was it?
Oh, it was get back in your place.
Get back in your place.
Get back in your place.
Yeah.
I ran into it in South Africa. I don't act like a South African. If you want to see an interesting contrast, in spite of the fact that apartheid is illegal and has been abolished, but the spirit of apartheid is as real as you and I sitting here right now. And because I had been raised in that environment, I didn't act like it. And people could pick it up. I get double takes everywhere I went in South Africa. And then, of course, the comments. My point, it's like they didn't get the memo. They didn't get the memo. What the memo says, when we're in Christ, we're truly one. When we're in Christ, you have more significance in my life than perhaps a biological brother of mine who may not be in Christ. That our link, our relationships come before our culture. I've never approved of the comment, I don't see color. I see color. I always do. I always want to. I see color. But I'm reminded in Revelation chapter 7, verse 9, it says, I'm going to paraphrase, standing around the throne, there's going to be every tribe, nation, kindred, and tongue, worshiping the Lord God Almighty. Now, notice it doesn't say, standing around the throne, they're going to all be the same. And they're going to all have on white linen, speaking of righteousness. Which means that when we get there, you're going to see me, I'm probably going to be the same color. My resurrected body. I don't know, but if I have I hope you give me a little bit of hair. You know, I don't ask for much. But I'm going to be who I am in terms of color, culture, ethnicity. But I'll have a resurrected body. And you're going to be who you are, resurrected body. Wouldn't it be nice if we've gotten over our struggles with race relations and culture and socioeconomics before we got there?
Yeah.
In John 17, Jesus prays to the Father. It's called the high priestly prayer. And he says that they all may be one, as you and I are, Father. And he goes on to say this, that the world might believe that you sent me. That tells me that prayer is for prior to his second coming. He wants us to be one before he returns. We can believe we're going to be one after he returns. But he prayed that they all might be one, as you and I, Father, are, that the world might believe that you sent me.
You know, you asked us to, one of the verses you wanted to focus on today was that verse in Philippians about having your love increasing, and increasing not just in word or in number of times you say I love you, but increasing in knowledge and discernment.
Yes.
See, we didn't bring him here just to tell stories just so you can say, oh, gee, you really had it tough. Or you have it tough because the horrible sin, the condemnation of growing up black in America. No, we're telling you that because what you need to know to love someone is the truth. And to be able to love someone intelligently and discerningly, you have to see color. If you say, I don't see color, you're not being honest. If you say, I don't see color, I understand what we mean by that. If we say, I don't see color, what we mean is, I'm not going to treat you differently because you're a different race or different color. And that's a good thing. But it's actually demeaning, it's devaluing to say, I don't see your color, because what that says is, that isn't important. That part of you, I don't count. I mean, you ladies, if someone said to you, you know, I just don't see gender. I just think we're all the same, like we're all male.
Yeah.
Does that make you feel good? Does that make you feel valued? Of course not. And so to say, I don't see color, the intention might be right, but we need to start saying, I want to see, I want to understand, what does it mean to have gone through this kind of experience, not just in our society, but in the church. To have a pastor say, look out for that guy, he's only here to try to rape our women and to get our women. Why? Because he's black and they are all the same. Do you like being told you're all the same? You're like all of those KKK guys? Does that make you feel good or honest? Don't you just want to go, stop it, I'm not like that? Because that's what we do when, that's what whites react to when we're said, you're all racist. When someone says, you're all racist. You say, no, I'm not. I'm not. Don't lump me in with all of those others. I was raised by a mom who was taught bigots were ignorant, even though her father was horribly prejudiced. And so this this assumption that they're all the same, whoever they are, is one of the things that's killing us. We want to love in right discernment and in more knowledge.
The Bible teaches us prescriptively and descriptively. What that means is prescriptive teaching is thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not bear false witness. It's prescriptive teaching. Descriptive teaching is this. Cain, was Abel your brother? Cain's response, I don't know, which was a lie. And then he goes to sarcasm. Am I my brother's keeper? That's descriptive teaching. What does that mean? Number one, there is an assumed responsibility that we have towards one another.
That's right.
Cain, where's your brother? Some of you, many of you, most of you, if not all of you, are parents. And you've said that. We have 4 children, 20 months apart. And so we're always, where's your brother? Now we have 4 grandchildren. Where's your sister? And the understanding is that you have a responsibility towards that younger child. Cain, where's your brother? And for him to resort to sarcasm, I actually believe that God, if you read the text, did not respond to that because it was beneath his dignity. I'm not going to dignify stupidity. What do you mean, are you your brother's keeper? Of course you're your brother's keeper. And that is descriptive teaching. We are our brother's keeper. I am here today not because of any reason other than the fact that I believe I owe something to my friend, his wife, Mary, and this congregation by virtue of him being the pastor. I believe I am my brother's keeper, and he believes that about me. And so when he asked me to come, I said, well, let's break out the calendar. I have a responsibility towards him. I see that he's white. I understand that. But I am not disparaging of that. And then let's go to Philippians. And this I pray that your love may abound, yet more and more, in all knowledge and all discernment. That if I truly love this man, I'm going to grow in my understanding of him, and I'm going to grow in my discernment, insights of him. I don't want to be offensive and say something that's ridiculously stupid about him or his culture or his ethnicity. I don't want to be disparaging. And so as my love grows for him, it should grow in knowledge and in understanding. And that has a lot to do with the fact that it's impossible to not see color if we're going to truly love one another. And so I grew up in an environment, as I told you at the beginning, where there were just so many cultures that were arrayed in front of me. And so I was privileged to learn about Chinese. I got to the place, by the way, where I could distinguish certainly Chinese from Japanese. Certainly, I began to distinguish Koreans had a particular look that was different from the Chinese. I began to learn about their culture. I began to learn about what happened in World War II with the Japanese and the Chinese. And I understood why there's some schisms and frictions there. And I learned about Tongans, an island people. They're a large-boned people, and they love to laugh. You want to go to an amazing worship service, find a Tongan church. My Lord, you're going to have a time. And I began to learn about various ethnic groups and their backgrounds and what have you, because if I'm truly going to love people, I'm going to learn something about them.
That's right.
That was a part of it. I've experienced so many embarrassing and derogatory remarks, sometimes literally in a service. I was a teenager, Christian. I'm hanging out with my friends, and we wanted to go to a particular church in the city of Alameda, just off Oakland, and on a Wednesday night. So we all walk in. We walked in late, and I didn't realize I was the only black person there. I honestly hadn't thought about it. I didn't realize that in the crowd that I was with, I was the only black, let alone in the congregation. And so I'm sitting there, and the service is going on, and it's time for announcements, and the lady stands up who's giving the announcements, and she literally says these words, "And we're so grateful to have our colored brother with us tonight. And perhaps before the service is over, he'll offer us a song, because colored people sure can sing." Now, don't forget, I'm a teenager. Remember how you were when you were a teenager? Mm-hmm. Remember how just sensitive you were anyway? And we're so glad to have our colored brother with us. I remember, good Lord. What did I do to warrant this? And then she went on to say, colored people sure can sing, and maybe I'll give them a song. Had I had my wits about me, I would have taken the mic and proven she was wrong. Yeah. Proven, baby.
Yeah. Yeah.
You can't treat people like that.
Yeah.
And that was in church. I had never seen her before.
Assumptions.
Yeah.
Assumptions about them.
Yeah.
Not like us. We're going to have to draw this to a close. I want to give you a takeaway, and I want to go back to that question, where's your brother?
Yeah.
Because God obviously wasn't, confused. Like, where's your brother? Isn't he supposed to be here? I thought I saw him here earlier.
Yeah.
And if we listen to it, we can hear the accusation, where's your brother? You killed him.
Yeah.
But that's not what God is saying. God knows that. We need to hear the anguish of God. It's the parent. It's, where is your brother? What have you done? And one of the things that God is talking to me about, and through all of this, is that when I hear these accusations, you're all racist, all cops are racist, I'll kill all, I can hear the accusation and immediately get on the defensive. Or I can hear the pain that's underneath the accusation and respond to the pain instead of responding to the accusation.
Yeah.
When I hear Don talk about growing up and these things that happened to him, I mean, he's a very secure guy. He's been a successful pastor. He doesn't lay awake in anxiety, wonder about, what are white people going to think about me if I don't do that,
No.
But those were painful, formative experiences. And his heart is, I don't want to see other people have to go through that. I want to end this so that my grandchildren and my friends and these fatherless teens that you're working with in the inner cities, I don't want them to grow up thinking that that's normal. I don't want them to start having these assumptions about whites or about cops or about themselves that aren't truthful. And so the takeaway is we want to start learning how to hear someone else. And so we got to have these conversations. We got to start these conversations to be able to learn so that I'm intelligently and discerningly responding to not just a horrific situation that we've got to have a slogan about and sign a banner and blah, blah, blah. But so I can hear the pain and respond to the pain, because that's what we have to offer. That's what this communion is about, which is where we're about to go next.